from the English Standard Version, and we are at 1 Corinthians 15, verse 35 to 38, which would form the basis of our study. Paul writes there, "But someone will ask, how are the dead raised? With what kind of body do they come? You foolish person, what you sow does not come to life unless it dies. And what you sow is not the body that is to be, but a bare kernel, perhaps of wheat or of some other grain. But God gives it a body as he has chosen, and to each kind of seed its own body." All right. Now, you will notice that in these verses, some words are highlighted in yellow or colored in yellow. The reason being that these particular verbs, if you go into the Greek, you'll find they are in the present passive, right? But for some reason, our translators, and I have yet to really find, I'm on a hunt for the perfect Bible translation. Okay. The ESV is better than most, but still, it still has its flaws. And here is one of the flaws where it goes with tradition rather than with what the actual text says. Reason being, as I said, the word raised here, okay, which is the word egero, is translated in the present passive, meaning it should really say, how are the dead being raised? Present passive, right? Present being, raised meaning the dead are not raising themselves, they are being raised, right? It's passive. So it does retain the passive because it says, how are the dead raised? So it does give the correct in terms of the dead are not raising themselves, they are raised by someone or some other power apart from themselves. But it does not retain the present tense, right? So how are the dead being raised? So at the time of Paul's writing, Paul actually is saying or was teaching that the dead were being raised at the time of the apostle, in the apostolic time, during the apostolic ministry. That's the point I want to make there, right? So again, our understanding of this raising needs to be transformed, right? With what kind of body do they come? You foolish person, what you sow does not come to life. Again, same thing, present passive. Okay, this should really say is not being brought to life unless it dies. Okay? So what we have is during that 40-year period between the pouring out of the Holy Spirit and the destruction of the temple, there was a raising of the dead that was happening. That is why my understanding of that raising includes not just those who were in Hades, being the biologically dead, but also the spiritually dead, meaning those who are living but were part of the covenant body of Moses, right? And as the gospel was being preached to them, they were being awakened and raised. Okay? Right? So that is why I'm saying that, that period of time, it was a raising of humanity from one, as we saw in by the way, I'm not going to go over this again in detail. You need to go and watch the previous video, point number 1, where I went into a bit more detail concerning the verbs igero and anastamai, in showing how these, what they mean, the raising from one lower state to a higher state, and the other being like the raising up of something that had fallen over to put it in a standing position, right? And I'm seeing these raisings and these awakening as spiritual realities, right? Pertaining to man's spiritual condition, which at the time of Adam, when Adam fell, I'm saying he fell over spiritually in his covenant standing with God, and also in his spiritual status, right? Condition, state. And that was what was being restored now. It was being made to stand and awakened back to the original position that God had created Adam in. Good? So that is why Paul uses the present passive in verse 35 and other places in 1 Corinthians 5. It's filled with present passive when he's speaking about this raising of the dead. Okay? And that is what really keyed me into this is more than just dealing with the biologically dead, right? It has to be dealing with spiritually dead, right? Which would now be both those who are living and those who had biologically died. Anyway, so these are some of the things that, Bible translations actually hinder us from coming into very important truths that were put there by the apostles in their writings from their inspiration of through the Holy Spirit, or by the Holy Spirit. So remember, our topic here said that Christ was planted as a seed so that we could be awakened as trees. So verse 37 says, what you sow. So the question was being asked concerning how are the dead raised? And the apostle goes into a seed metaphor. Okay? He says, what you sow, okay, is not the body that is to be. Think about that. So he uses a seed metaphor. So he says, if you have a seed, a tiny, brown, hard object or thing, when you sow that, when you plant that, a seed doesn't grow out of the ground. No, something different comes out of the ground. You plant this hard, brown, shiny, small thing, and out of the ground comes a soft, flowing, green, tender, wispy thing, life. Okay? So that's what he says. What is sown is not what grows. He says, what you sow, meaning the seed, is not the body that is to be, is not what grows. But you sow a bare kernel, perhaps of wheat or some other grain. So this is what you sow. You sow a kernel, you sow a seed, like a wheat grain or some other kind of grain, corn or wheat or whatever. But he says, but God gives it a body. Right? So the body is the thing that grows, like the plant, okay? Whatever plant it is, that's the body. God gives it a body as he has chosen. So you have a seed that you sow, and out of the seed comes a body that God gives it. Okay? As he has chosen to each kind of seed its own body. So the body of the seed is not the shell, it's not the hard I can't even remember what is the biological the scientific name of that hard part of the seed. Let's call it the shell, right? The body of the seed is not the shell. The body of the seed is what is inside the seed. Okay? The body of the seed is what comes out of the seed. The plant, the seedling, right? According to what Paul is, I'm following Paul's metaphor. I'm not going by how we understand things biologically, right? I'm going by what Paul is saying. So if I have to understand what Paul is trying to communicate, I have to follow his line of thinking. I can't go and think along the lines of science, botany, and the scientific things. The Bible was not written as a scientific book. It's not written to teach us science. The Bible is a spiritual book, right? So I have to follow the line of thinking of the apostle. And he is saying that the body of the seed is not the shell. The body of the seed is what's inside the seed and what comes out of the seed after it's planted. And what comes out of the seed after it's planted is not this, it doesn't resemble the seed at all. Okay? That's what he's saying, right? So this is incredible, right? Because again, coming back to folk who are saying, well, look, there must be a bodily resurrection. And when we say bodily resurrection, we are saying, well, the person who goes into the grave, they must come out and they must look exactly the same like how they went in. Because when Christ went into the tomb and he was raised, he came out looking exactly the same like how he went in. So that means we must do that. We must do the same. But go back to point number 1 to see what are the implications of that, right? I'm not going to go over that. Go back to point number 1 to see the implications if that's your understanding. But what Paul is saying, no. The body that comes out from the seed is totally, completely different from the seed. Good, it looks different. It's a different thing. Good, and so let's